Assalamu alaikum, my dear students. This is Dr. Muhammad Shafiq, lecturer from Department of Islamic and Pakistan Studies. And the course I'm teaching you is called Introduction to Logic. The course code is PHI 101. And this is lecture number 12. So today we are going to discuss what are the laws of thought and what do we mean by that. So what is meant by laws of thought? As we know, this world is governed by different kinds of laws, and there are two kinds of, generally speaking, there are two major kinds of laws. The ones which operate the nature of the world are called laws of nature, and these kind of laws are natural, obviously not man-made. These are God-made laws, and even if we want to violate them, we cannot violate them, or even if we violate them, we will have to face the repercussions. For example, we take the example of law of gravity. So, law of gravity is a natural law. We cannot violate it, or if you want to violate it, suppose if you want to jump out of that window and you want to violate this law and you want to go upwards instead of going down, you simply cannot do it, and you'll face the results of this attempt in the shape of injuries you'll sustain. So, on the one hand, you have these laws of nature or natural laws. There are other certain laws which are man-made laws, and they are called normative laws. Those laws are, generally speaking, man-made for their own convenience. For example, there are traffic laws, there is criminal laws, there are different kinds of rules and principles. For example, if you are studying at university, there are semester rules. So you have to obey these rules or laws. If you don't, obviously you will get punished. Now, what are the laws of thought? Laws of thought are those laws basically which operate our thoughts. In other words, we can actually violate these laws, but as a result, our argument would be invalid and would not be accepted by anyone, because these laws are, again, universal laws, and you cannot simply change them according to your own needs and requirements. So, as we know, the logic is called the science of laws of thought, or as a study of those methods and principles which distinguish between correct reasoning and incorrect reasoning, right? Now, there must be certain principles or laws for the correct reasoning which we study, or which lie at the root of logic as a science. So these principles or laws are called laws of thought, and because these underlie all valid or correct thinking, they are called the foundation of logic. So, why do we need laws of thought? Obviously, logic being the study of methods and principles which distinguish between correct reasoning and incorrect reasoning, right? So, if we follow these laws of thought, obviously our reasoning would be correct, and if we don't, then our reasoning cannot be called correct and nobody would accept our arguments. Now the question arises, how many are there? There are how many laws of thought? To begin with, there were, in traditional logic, there were three laws of thought, but later on, uh, a German philosopher called Leibniz, he added another one, which is called the laws of, which is called the law of sufficient reason. So there are four laws of thought which we need to reflect upon in order to equip ourselves with those tools to present our arguments in a valid way, in a correct way. So what are these four laws of thoughts? Let's start with the first one, and that is identity. Now, as it is evident from its title, this law is about the identity. The law of identity says a thing is what it is. Everything is identical with itself. A man is a man, a book is a book. Now, what does it mean? Whatever a thing is, it is, and not another thing. Does it make sense? Well, a table is a table, a book is a book. It is usually expressed in the formula saying if A is B, then it is B. This law says that if you assign an identity to any particular object or thing in an argument, suppose you give identity to a crow being black, and if you say all crows are black, you have basically given identity of blackness to the whole class of crows. Now, this identity of crow throughout that argument must remain the same. So if you try to change that identity, if in the same argument in a later stage you try to say crow is white, yellow, blue or green, you are basically violating the law of identity. So if you violate the law of identity, your argument fails the basic requirement of being a valid argument. So the law of identity says if iron is a metal, it is a metal. Throughout the argument, you cannot change the identity. If man is mortal, he must be mortal throughout the argument. Therefore, if we say that a certain thing possesses a certain attribute or a certain identity, we must always admit it throughout the argument. If we say board is black, it must always be admitted that attribute of the blackness belongs to the board. So the law of identity is an expression of identity of things. It is important to note that this law says if in an argument we have used a term in certain sense, we must use it in the same sense throughout the argument. Every term and proposition must be used in fixed meaning in an argument. No clear thinking is possible without identity. So, this law demands that a term should have fixed meaning in an argument, and if it does not, your argument fails to be called a valid argument. So I hope you understand what does the law of identity means. Now we'll move to the next one, which is contradiction. Before starting about this law, I would like to explain the term contradiction. Basically, contradiction, the meaning of contradiction is the opposite, or contradiction in Urdu would mean tazad. So, the law of non-contradiction says a thing cannot both be and non-be at the same time. In other words, A cannot be B and non-B at the same time. So what does it mean? It says that a thing cannot be present and non-present at the same time. Two contradictory qualities or two contradictory attributes cannot be present in an object. Two contradictory things cannot be true at the same time. A thing cannot possess two contradictory or inconsistent attributes at the same time and place. A cannot possess the attribute of B and non-B at the same time. A book cannot be read and non-read at the same time. A man cannot be Muslim and non-Muslim at the same time. Now, a book cannot be read and non-read at the same time. This statement might be a bit confusing for some of you, because before that we need to explain what does non-read, or what is the contradiction of black or red. Normally when I ask my students what is the contradiction or what is the opposite or what is the tazad of black, and they normally reply with saying white, but this is not the correct answer, because the contradictory term of black would be non-black. So if you say a book cannot be read and non-read at the same time, you might think that, hang on a minute, a book can be red and blue at the same time. A book can be red and white, red and black. So what does it mean a book cannot be read and non-read at the same time? That means if a book possesses the attribute of redness, you cannot say that it does not possess attribute of redness. I suppose with the example of being Muslim and non-Muslim at the same time would be better to explain this law. So as we know that there are certain qualifications for being a Muslim. So once you are a Muslim, you are a Muslim. You cannot be Muslim and non-Muslim at the same time. That is what the law of non-contradiction says. So again, in an argument, if you say all Pakistanis are Muslim, and then on the later stage you go on and say that Mr. So-and-so is Pakistani and he is non-Muslim. So basically you are contradicting yourself in the argument, and that makes your argument invalid. So the law of non-contradiction says you need to be very careful while composing an argument. You have to follow this law, and you cannot contradict yourself. So whatever statement you make in a premise, you cannot use the contradictory terms for that in any later stage while composing an argument. So if you do that, obviously you will be denying your own self, and you will be self-contradictory, and that would lead to an invalid argument, and nobody would accept that. So the law of non-contradiction is like that. After that, there is another law of the third law, and now we are going to move to the third law, which is the law of exclusion. The law of excluded middle says that a thing must be either B or not B. In other words, A must be either B or non-B. It has to be one of these two. Again, slightly confusing. So what does it mean? So simply, if I take you back to the law of non-contradiction, which says that two contradictory qualities cannot be present in an object at the same time, right? So simply, as we cannot say that a person is Muslim and non-Muslim at the same time, this law of excluded middle says the converse of that, that if two contradictory attributes cannot be present in an object at the same time, similarly, two contradictory attributes cannot be absent in an object at the same time. A book cannot be read, a book cannot be read and non-read at the same time, as the law of non-contradiction would say. So the law of excluded middle says that a book must be either read or non-read. Simply like a person must be Muslim or non-Muslim. It's not that a person is neither Muslim or non-Muslim. This doesn't make any sense, does it? So if you reflect upon it, you'll come to know that in law of non-contradiction, as we say that two contradictory attributes cannot be present at the same time, in the law of excluded middle, we say that two contradictory elements cannot be absent at the same time. A crow cannot be black and non-black at the same time. Similarly, a crow, we cannot say that a crow is neither black nor non-black, or we cannot say a person is neither Muslim nor non-Muslim. Either he is a Muslim or non-Muslim. Similarly, either crow is black or non-black. In non-black, that could be any color like white, blue, yellow, green, red, anything. But it's not possible that the crow is neither black or non-black, or a person is neither Muslim or non-Muslim. So this is what law of excluded middle says, that we do not have a third option. A person must be either Muslim or non-Muslim. So that's what excluded middle term is used for. According to the law of non-contradiction, two contradictions cannot both be true at the same time. Now, the law of excluded middle says that two contradictory attributes cannot be false at the same time. In other words, law of excluded middle says that two contradictory attributes cannot be absent at the same time in that same thing. So the law of non-contradiction says two contradictory statements cannot be true together. Law of excluded middle says that two contradictory statements cannot be false together. We must remember that law of excluded middle refers only to contradictories. For example, we can say that a color must be either red or non-red. But We cannot say that a color must be either red or yellow because red and non-red are contradictories and between them there is no third possibility. But red and yellow are not contradictories, rather contraries, and between contraries other alternative is possible. So this law applies only in the case of contradictories, not in the case of contraries. We cannot say that if a color not red, it must be yellow, but we can say if a color is not red, it must be non-red. So this is the law of excluded middle. Now I hope you have understood this. So we'll move on to the fourth law, and that is called now law of sufficient reason was introduced by Leibniz, was a German philosopher, and this law says that nothing happens in this world without a reason. Why it should be so rather than otherwise. So what does it mean? This is simply because this law simply means that there is a reason behind everything, whatever happens. Nothing can happen in this world without any reason. So this principle, which was first introduced by German philosopher Leibniz, says whatever exists or is true must have a sufficient reason behind it. Why this thing or proposition as it is and not otherwise. This law says that whatever there is, anything, it must have an adequate reason or cause. There must be a sufficient reason behind it. So this law not only demands a cause or reason for everything, but a sufficient reason or adequate cause. For example, when we talk about the quantity of poison enough to kill a person, we are actually talking about sufficient cause. And when we talk about hard work, which causes the success of a student, we are talking about sufficient hard work, not any amount of hard work. So this law says that for everything there must be sufficient cause or reason. If an earthquake happens, there must be sufficient cause for its happening. Sometimes we might not be aware of the cause or reason, but it does not mean that that thing has happened by a chance. For example, by sufficient reason or adequate cause, we mean, like for example, if I say that if you work hard, you will pass the exam. Now a student walks to me and says that, sir, you said if you work hard, you will pass the exam. And I've been working hard throughout the semester, but still I failed my exam. And then I asked him, what kind of hard work you've been doing? He goes that I have been running around throughout the semester in the ground, which was a really hard task for me. And in spring semester, the weather is so hot that makes it even harder for me to run around in the uni and go up to the hill and come down 5 times a day. I've been working really hard, but still I failed the exam. Now, obviously, that is a hard work, like running around the uni throughout the semester or going up the hill 5 times a day or whatsoever. But that hard work is not sufficient reason to pass the exam. For passing the exam, the sufficient reason or the hard work would be to study the books, to attend the lectures, and try to understand the concepts. So the law of sufficient reason means that there is a reason behind everything, but a sufficient reason. Like we gave the example of poison. Now, there are so many medications which use poison in that, but that is not a sufficient amount to kill someone. So there is a sufficient amount of poison which can kill someone. So if someone swallows that, obviously he or she will die. But less than that amount is normally used in medication to treat the patients. So law of sufficient reason says that there must be a reason behind everything, but sufficient reason which causes that action. So these are the laws of thought, and we need to observe these laws while composing an argument or analyzing an argument if we want to do correct reasoning, or if we want to present correct arguments or valid arguments in order to be accepted. If any argument or any reasoning or any theory breaks any one of these laws, that cannot be considered correct reasoning, valid reasoning, or an acceptable theory. So I hope you understood these laws of thought, and if you have any questions, please do let me know, and we will clarify these questions before moving on to next topic in our next lecture. Till then, thank you very much, take care, and Allah Hafiz.